So we're making this video to help show the perspectives that have shaped the messaging position for XRUK and the recommendations that we're making with regards to how we want to relate to COP26 this year in Glasgow. We've got a political circle who think deeply about these things, and they've listened to the perspectives of young people whose hopes often get raised and then dashed by these panels of so-called leaders, right? We've listened to our reparations experts and those with direct relationships with those communities most affected in the majority world. And we've also had legal professionals with long-term experience and knowledge of this COP process. And those folks have seen this as a long-term failed attempt to address the climate and ecological emergency. And that's not to say there aren't great people that go to some of these COP processes and try their best, right? We're one family and we're not trying to divide from everybody here. There's a document link below this YouTube, which will give you more information and references. And I guess where I'm coming from is what we do in the run up to COP and during and afterwards is it's more about building our movement, the scale and the strength of the movement, the connections across the world. This emergency is getting worse. It's going to escalate as the years go by. We're heading in the direction of authoritarianism, food shortages and so on. We need to strategize together and plan for post-COP and get stronger and stronger as a movement as things are naturally going to unravel. So listening to these experts to speak about the COP.
My name is Adetola Stephanie Onomade, and I'm a member of the Global Majority versus the UK Government campaign. I've been involved with some youth groups such as XR Youth Solidarity. So this year, the UK government will be hosting the Conference of Parties, or COP26, in Glasgow. As a member of the Global Majority who's part of the diaspora, so the majority of my family being in the Global South, in the Caribbean and on the continent of Africa, where the UK has historically played a large role in the extractivism and corruption that takes place in these countries. In this process of COP26, there's very little faith in those who've been elected to set out this process, because they have met in private. The Conservative Party have met in private with fossil fuel companies and have given millions of pounds. They have given millions of pounds to the Conservative Party in the last 10 years. They've met 9 times more with fossil fuel companies than with renewable energy companies, and they have spent over £1 billion misleading the public on climate related issues. And the UK government is aware of this, yet it calls itself a climate leader when the real climate leaders are in the global majority, in the global south, where they are resisting extractivism. And this process does not allow people to resist further. It leads to more climate inaction from the global north and those most responsible for these issues.
So hi, I'm Tim Crosland. I was previously a government lawyer. I now spend most of my time either suing the government or being prosecuted by the government with the climate litigation charity Plan B. So the main purpose of the COP process is to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. It's COP26 now because we've had 25 years of COPs before it. The reason the objective is to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, well, we've seen that partly over the summer, even in the global north. The heat dome in North America and Canada, those rows of prostrate people in cooling centres, the infernos around the Mediterranean, whole villages being decimated in Germany and France just with 1.2 degrees, the sort of impacts that we've seen in the global south for decades and decades. The science predicts that beyond 1.5 degrees, whole regions of the world will become uninhabitable because the wet bulb temperature will pass 35 degrees Celsius beyond the capacity of the human body to cool itself down. The risks of multiple cereal breadbasket failure will rise very substantially, jeopardizing food security, meaning people may not be able to put food on the table. So that's why that figure was agreed on.
My name's Chris. I'm a youth activist in Newcastle and I'm 20 years old. Decades of denial, inaction, and exponential increases in our carbon emissions have led us to this point. In the face of the existential threat of our generation, the best our governments can offer us is lies and betrayal. Despite the greenwash climate accords and conferences, we've emitted more carbon since governments have been meeting to address the climate crisis than in the entirety of human history beforehand. Our government's committed to try and keep global warming under 1.5 degrees 6 years ago. Rich countries promised to provide $100 billion a year by 2020 to support decarbonised sustainable development in poor countries. These were just barefaced lies. Since then, governments across the world have spent more subsidising fossil fuels than they have on policies to meet their commitments, using taxpayers' money to fund the destruction of our very future. Our governments are not just failing to protect our future, they're actively decimating it.
COP26 marks the moment of a terrible political failure, the greatest political failure in our history. It's now clear that limit will not be maintained. The limit governments set themselves, and according to their own evidence, what the IPCC had said was for a fair chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, global emissions would have to go down by 45% by 2030. In fact, the latest analysis is they're going to go up 16% by 2030. It's important to be honest about that, not to be depressed about it, but as James Baldwin says, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. It's only when we face up to this failure.
Hi, my name's George. I'm from the XRUK political circle. One of the most powerful industries the world has ever known has been capturing governments across the world for decades, and it's been capturing the media stories that we get told about climate change. It's responsible for thousands of articles saying that, you know, the lights will go off if we don't keep burning fossil fuels. So where are we now, 26 years into the COP process? We're at a stage of catastrophic greenwashing. All the governments have signed up to the rhetoric that says we need to keep to 1.5 degrees. And quite simply, at current rates of emissions, the world has 6 to 13 years before we hit 1.5 degrees. And the UK, because we are one of the countries that has caused the problem, need to cut faster than the poor countries. So we have between 2 and 6 years of our current emissions to meet 1.5 degrees. And meanwhile, the world is being told 2050, keeping 1.5 in sight. It is quite simply a lie. And it's a lie perpetrated by putting so-called negative emissions onto future generations. So we've literally just planning to carry on burning oil and gas for decades to come, and we're just saying that in the future we're going to somehow suck this stuff out of the atmosphere. Meanwhile, hundreds of millions of people are suffering. Over 5 million people are dying because of the carbon economy every single year. And in any other circumstance where powerful actors are making decisions which knowingly cause the death of millions of people a year, we would call that mass murder. This is why we're calling it a crime against humanity.
This collective failure is a crime against humanity. It's a crime against youth, it's a crime against future generations, and it's a crime against those already feeling the effects of climate breakdown. The governments that will meet at COP26 under the guise of inspiring climate action, their words, not mine, are the biggest threat humanity faces. We have the science, we have the tools, and we have the motivation to prevent further environmental and ecological collapse. But instead, we're sleepwalking off a cliff, accelerating towards oblivion. Instead, it's young people who will pay the price. It's us who have to live with the lack of decision-making by our so-called leaders, the lack of decision-making taking place at greenwashing summits like COP26. If these are the leaders that took us into this crisis, how can we put our trust in them to see us out of it?
We quite simply need a fair global conference of the people and not a corrupted conference of parties. We need people from across the world to come to the table and come up with sensible decisions about how we address this in a way that will help everybody reach a decent, flourishing future and prevent the destruction of life as we know it. And this is mainly about rich countries. They're responsible for 92% of the excess emissions in the atmosphere. So when we're told, what about China? It is the UK, the US, the countries that have been burning fossil fuels for hundreds of years that need to fund the transformation across the world. That means paying for the leapfrogging of poor countries from brown energy to green. And we have a $90 trillion a year global economy. We need to stump up a few trillion to actually pay for that transformation that gives our kids a chance for a future. We've stumped up trillions for the financial crisis, for COVID. We can do it for a decent future. And yeah, quite simply, an adequate response to this crisis, given that at current rates we're likely to hit 1.5 by 2030. We should be doing everything we can to hit global net zero by 2030, with the rich countries paying for the damage that they've caused. And that would mean like a wartime style mobilization. The IPCC said we need rapid, far-reaching, unprecedented changes to every aspect of society. And despite the rhetoric, nothing like that is on the table in the UK, that calls itself a climate leader, or anywhere else. And this is why COP is set to be a catastrophic failure. But not because we couldn't do it otherwise. The human race has the capacity like never before to transform the way the world does business and create a beautiful, flourishing future for all. But it is not happening. And unless it happens now, things are only going to get worse and worse. Quite simply, nothing like what is required is on the table at COP. And instead, we have a narrative of success, which is really clear. They're going to call it a success if they get lots more countries to sign a bit of paper, essentially saying we're going to be net zero by 2050. And it means nothing in terms of what is actually happening to the planet. They're also going to say we're going to get $100 billion into an account. A, that's a fraction of what is required to pay for the damage and the transformation, but B, it can even be loans. So we're talking about countries getting hammered by climate change and then going to more debt. We must stand up against this process. XR Scotland have called for as many people as possible to come and support their actions there, and we have to disrupt this COP, this crazy business as usual, and tell an inspiring story about what the truth of our situation actually is.
I am Esther Stanford-Cossey, and I am a co-founder of Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network. We share the widespread viewpoint common within Global South communities of resistance that such top-down processes like the COP only result in greenwashing that facilitates the growing threat of eco-fascism by not seeking to resolve the crux of the matter of the worldwide climate and ecological crisis and the genocide and ecocide of extractivism. For this reason, we are not prepared as peoples to wait any longer on change from the top and are already creating alternatives from the ground up. True to our own XRISM mandate, we need to truthfully amplify voices of the global majority that are creating the alternatives to failed processes like the COP. There is the imperative for us to do so because of our XRISM strategy, which tries to actualize the principles enshrined in what internationalist solidarity means. That is, connecting the liberation efforts of peoples and not encouraging the paternalistic attitude of saviorism, which ends up being the coloniality of white saviorism. Our XRISM strategy is about globalization to interconnect communities of resistance in both the Global South and the Global North to work closer together as the global majority on unifying their people's power and strengthening it in multicultural and intercultural engagements of co-liberation actions of planet repairs rebellion. So this rebellion is not just about rebellion against extractivism and its perpetrators, but rather change-making actions that seek to stop the harm being done through the genocide and ecocide crimes of the worldwide climate and ecological crisis, and galvanize internationalist solidarity in shutting down ecocide crimes of extractivist plunder in order to effect and secure holistic societal and ecological repairs for transformative adaptation that will enable all life forms to thrive in balance with our Mother Earth.